Hey there guys, my name's EarthToLydia and welcome to a Dead by Daylight tier list video. Now, I know this is going to be strange, but for once in my entire YouTube career, I'm probably actually going to be taking this seriously. So today, we are going to be ranking Dead by Daylight killers. But before you skip ahead, before you get into it too much, this is going to be for beginners. So people that have come into the Dead by Daylight community for the first time, aren't really sure what killer to pick up, and this is going to be for you guys. I am not rating the killers in terms of strength. So if that's what you're looking for, I'm sorry, I'm still not ready to do one of those yet. But yeah, this is for the people that are brand new to the game, or maybe you've been a survivor main for several hundred hours like I was. Either way, this tier list is to help you guys find your feet and step into the killer realm. I need to disclaimer this and say this is just my opinion, because I know a lot of people can't handle that. But yeah, without further ado, let's begin. I'm going to start off with D tier, which is killers that I really wouldn't recommend to beginners. And my first one is going to be quite controversial, but I'm going to put Nurse in there. And the reason that I'm doing that is because Nurse is unlike any other killer. So if you start off playing the game just learning Nurse, and to be fair, if you only want to learn Nurse, then that's fair play. But if you want to step into the realm of killer in general, she is not going to teach you a lot of the core mechanics, like how to chase and how to loot properly. Also, she is very, very difficult to learn in general. But like I said, if you want to just main Nurse and no one else, then fair play, by all means pick her up. The next one that I'm going to put in here is the newest killer to the bunch, and that is Trickster. The reason why I wouldn't want you to pick him up is because, well, several reasons actually, but none of which are the same as Nurse. So he's a 110 movement speed killer, which means he is a lot slower than normal. It is really, really easy to overuse his power as well. If you focus too much on his blades, you're gonna see a lot of people slip through the net. Also, he doesn't really do well in the scoring categories, and it is very, very easy to either D-pip or safety pip as him, even if you do kill everybody in the game. So if you're looking for a killer to really learn the ropes, teach you how to loot properly, Trickster's probably not the best one. And the next killer that I'm going to put in this tier for the same reason is going to be Pyramid Head. Again, it's super, super easy to get hung up with the Trail of Torment, with trying to use his ranged attack, and realistically, he doesn't actually do best with those. You still want to use him kind of like an M1 killer, but it is so easy to just get wrapped up in tormenting the survivors and sending them to cages. Also, for newer players, it is going to be hard to come to terms with when you should use the ranged attack and when you should hook a tormented survivor over sending them to a cage. So for that reason, I wouldn't recommend Pyramid Head to newer players. And the last killer that I'm going to put in this tier is actually Oni. Yes, he's kind of similar to Hillbilly and he's more agile. However, you can't use his power as freely. And I've been learning Oni lately, and I can say that his power is a lot harder to come to terms with. Like with other M1 killers as well, he does get penalized, so you've really got to learn when to use his power. And as a newer player to the game, if you are brand new, trying to learn a killer that focuses an awful lot on their power isn't teaching you the basics to the game, like how to shut down loops, how to pressure gens, and so on and so forth. So that's the reason why I'm putting Oni in this tier. Now we're moving on up to C tier. Now these killers I've found also have quite a heavy focus on their power, but maybe not so much that it completely detracts away from everything else. And the first killer that I want to put in this tier is the Hag. Now, unlike Trapper, which we'll talk about a little bit later, Hag requires constant upkeep of her traps. Once you set them, you can't reset them in the same spot. You have to constantly be on top of them, and as one trap is triggered, either you teleport to it or you stick to the chase or whatever you're doing at the time. Hag is very much about knowing when to take her traps and when not to, which I think can be a bit overwhelming for beginners. Also, you can very much get drawn into the whole setting a trap and resetting a trap over and over again, which I don't think is going to be beneficial to newer players. A theme that's going to be appearing throughout the rest of this tier list, by the way, is going to be knowing when to use and when not to use your power as a killer. And the next killer that we have in this list are the twins. Again, knowing when to detach Victor and when to leave him can be a bit overwhelming for newer players. Also, knowing that you can get killer instinct from him or when to hide Charlotte, all of this is a lot of information for newer players to take on. There can be huge benefits to using Victor to down a survivor, but also some benefits to get him to attach to a healthier survivor. And learning when to versus when not to use him takes quite a bit of time and understanding. A lot of the time you can use Victor out in the map to gain different information on various areas, but newer players probably won't know this and instead will just try to use him to pounce on survivors all the time. This isn't always beneficial, and you can definitely get more information out of him. The next killer that I'm going to put in this tier is Plague. Now, Plague actually has various reasons for this. The first one being, of course, Corrupt Purge. As a beginner, you're probably going to see the Corrupted Fountain at the beginning of the game and want to go straight for this, as of course it does remove a complete health state. However, it's probably not the best time to use it when everybody's full health. A good plague will know to circle the map, purge on as many objects as possible, and to try and get survivors infected as quickly as possible. But a bad or newer plague might circle the map an awful lot, not able to find survivors and therefore not getting them infected fast enough. If you don't have the best aim with her projectile either, then this is going to be a very long-winded task. She is also another killer that gets heavily impacted in the chaser status, so learning her probably isn't the best for someone who's brand new. For completely unrelated reasons, the next person that I'm going to put in C tier is Blight. The reason I'm putting Blight up here is because I've personally tried to learn him lately, and right off the bat, I know that his rush isn't the easiest to get to grips with. The game doesn't really do a good job at holding your hand either to know how big that window is where you can chain rushes. Also, his steering is quite difficult, and unlike Oni and Hillbilly, you can't just keep on rushing around the map until you find a survivor. His rush kind of has a little bit of a lunge element, so you've got to be quite confident in where you're heading. Also, you can't get around corners and door frames, so he's quite heavily impacted by different maps. The next killer that I'm going to be putting in this list is Deathslinger. Now, Deathslinger is another ranged killer, and again, I don't think beginners are going to know when best to use his harpoon. It's very, very easy to just stand there and aim down your sights and hope to God that you hit something, but a lot of survivors will start dodging. Also, the harpoon has a very, very small hitbox. It's not what you think it's going to be, so it's actually quite difficult to hit a survivor that's dodging. Therefore, I think you've got to use the harpoon in a quickfire sense, and that can take time to get used to. Also, with the reel mechanic, you've got to get used to that timer and understand when is best to break the chain yourself, as well as what you can and can't lunge around. And the next killer I'm going to put in this tier is Hillbilly. Now, I very nearly put Hillbilly in B tier. After all, he is rated as easy in the difficulty settings in game, but I don't think he's quite as easy as some other killers. Especially now he has this overheat mechanic, you've really got to know when to use Billy's power. As a new player to the game, it's gonna take a little while for you to get to grips on the charge time of the chainsaw. He is less agile than Oni, which makes it harder for him to get around certain loops. However, if you don't try to overuse the chainsaw, I think you can get to grips with him in a bit of time. Now we're moving on to B tier, which we're gonna start off with Demogorgon. Now one thing I would say about Demogorgon is don't underestimate the power of his portals. You can use them to traverse the maps very quickly, and if the survivors destroy them, that just means that you can set them down somewhere else, and it takes away from their objective time. One thing that I did overuse when trying to learn Demogorgon was his shred. Now, you want to play him a little bit more like an M1 killer than you would think, and also don't underestimate the value of holding the shred, as the longer that you hold the shred, the further he lunges. You can use it to bait out dead hards and to bait pallet drops fairly quickly as well, but there are a few different things in his kit that could make him quite confusing to somebody who's brand new. Next up, we have Doctor. Now, according to recent stats, it actually shows that Doctor is one of the deadliest in the game right now, which might be true. However, getting the timing on the zaps right is something that takes a little bit of time. You also want to use his power a little less than you would initially think, and it is super easy to overuse his power. Now, a good Doctor doesn't need to zap that often, but he can still be really deadly and shut down loops, which is something that I think is also going to take some time and practice. Next up, I'm going to put Clown. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think that Clown has the best map pressure in the game, but, and this is a theme that's going to come up quite a bit later, he's a killer whose power isn't very invasive on the core mechanics of killer. And that is what I would say is probably something that is the best for beginners to the game. Although having said that, he makes it a little easier to shut down chasers. If you don't have the best aim, you're going to waste a lot of bottles, and also some skilled survivors are not going to find you the biggest threat when it comes to looping. Next up, I'm going to place Huntress. Now, she is our OG ranged killer from the game. Huntress is one of the first killers that I actually started out with, and she got me to higher ranks very quickly. However, I already understood the core mechanics of the game before I picked her up. Now, Huntress is a projectile-based killer, which means you've got to be able to predict survivors pretty well, whether that's knowing when to draw a hatchet at a pallet, or guessing where they're going to run if you see their aura, or trying to predict when is the right time to throw a hatchet on a further away survivor. She's mostly about prediction, and obviously that's going to be very hard to pick up if you don't really have an awful lot of time in the game. However, time and patience with Huntress, and thankfully the hatchets have the hitboxes of beach balls, so unlike some of the other ranged killers, you're gonna get away with less accurate hits. Next up, I'm gonna put Ghostface. Now, the reason that I'm not putting Ghostface higher up is because I think that it's gonna be very, very tempting for newer killers to get drawn into the stalk mechanic and think that you need to stalk him down every survivor, which isn't the case. Ghostface. Fundamentally, Ghostface can play very well as a normal M1 killer, but you've got to know when to use the Night Shroud, and then when you get a bit more experienced, you'll also know when to use the exposed status. And finally, to round off B tier, I am going to put Myers. The only major hang up with Myers is you've got to be able to locate survivors very quickly to get your stalk up and to tier up into tier 2. Also, his add-ons might be a little bit confusing, and you've got to know how to 99% your stalk and when is the best to pop it. He also is one of the only killers that actually has a different lunge range. So in tier 1, he has a reduced lunge, and in tier 3, he has an extended lunge, which is going to be a little bit confusing. But he's one of the first killers that I ever mained in the game, and I really don't think that's hindered me, as his power doesn't greatly impact your overall learning experience. And now we are moving on to A tier. The first one I'm going to put up here is Legion, as like Doctor, he actually does incredibly well in the scoring categories. Frenzy also isn't that complicated of a power, and I think you can get to grips fairly quickly with when to use it and when not to. Also, like a lot of the other killers that we're going to see at the top here, his power doesn't really impact how you play him. The killer's instinct that you get from Frenzy is also not that complicated and gives you really good information as to where other survivors are in your surroundings. The only thing I will say about Legion is try not to double Frenzy hit. It can be very tempting for the sake of points, but it just gives that injured survivor a little bit extra room to get away from you or get to a loop. Next up, I'm going to place Pig in A tier. Now, the good thing about Pig is she is very, very basic in the way that she chases. She is essentially an M1 killer. She does have a couple of hangups though, and that is a lot of people are going to try to overuse her ambush. I really think that her ambush is something that takes a bit of time to get to grips with and to know when to use them. Personally, I only really use ambushes at unsafe pallet loops, or I actually cancel my ambushes after crouching to try and force a survivor away from a loop. Also, when it comes to her reverse bear traps, if you don't get them on very quickly, they don't have a lot of use or power. The reverse bear traps are basically an inbuilt gen slowdown, but they're not active right from the start of the game, so you've got to get them in there as soon as possible. Next up, I'm gonna put Leatherface. Now, Leatherface is a little bit of a strange one for me because before his rework, I definitely fell into the trap of trying to overuse his chainsaw, which is very easily done actually. I thought you could use his chainsaw to catch up to survivors, and pre-rework that wasn't really the case. Now you actually can, but generally speaking, you want to be right on top of a survivor before you try to chainsaw them. Also, his tantrum is a little bit of a hang-up too. If you hit a wall or some other object while using your chainsaw, you will go into tantrum, and that is vital time that the survivor can use to get away from you. So while he's pretty beginner friendly and pretty easy to get kills as, he's not without his hiccups. Next up in A tier, we are going to put Trapper. Now, Trapper is most people's beginner killer. His power doesn't really impact his chasing too much, particularly if you're using a loop and you don't have it trapped. And he's a very good killer for teaching you how loops work, because his power isn't that invasive at all. However, having said that, his power does require some setup at the start of the game, and if you don't manage your time well, the survivors can well and truly take advantage of this. Also, knowing good places to trap is vital. Sometimes trapping completely out in the open can work in your favor, particularly if you've got a map with tall grass. However, other times, trapping out in the open in a very open space, a survivor's never going to run into it. And on the other side of the coin, sometimes if you trap very obvious loops, the survivors will go straight to it and just undo your trap. But other times, if you don't trap a loop, a survivor could have walked straight into it. Trapper is a real double-edged sword with knowing where to put your traps or not, but I don't think he's the worst when it comes to beginners. Another one that is a little bit of a gamble that is going to round off A tier for us is the Spirit. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say Spirit's easy mode and you can pick her up more than any other killer, and to an extent I would agree. However, she's not completely great for beginners, and I'm going to tell you why. Now, some of you will know that I have a little bit of a problem with my hearing. I have issues with depth perception, so for me, trying to play Spirit can be a little bit difficult because I won't know exactly where a survivor is if I'm phasing. And if you also suffer with this, then maybe she's not going to be the easiest to pick up for you. Also, trying to overuse your power again can be terrible. More often than not, faking your power is just as good as actually using it. But if you don't fall into the trap of trying to overuse your phase walk, she can be very, very beginner friendly. She again can teach you the core mechanics of the game, but she can also bait out throwing very, very strong pallets just by standing still. Or she can even bait out survivors walking away from very safe loops just by standing still. Either way, she's quite a good one to pick up from the get-go, and she also is quite strong too. Now, next up, we're moving on to S tier, and we only have 2 killers left for this. The reason that I'm picking these two as well is for very different reasons. We'll go over Freddy first because I don't actually think that he's the one that you should pick up straight away, but he is super easy to pick up if you're brand new to killer. He can teleport across the map to pressure gens if needed. You can also loop loop fairly easily with him, and he has built-in gen slowdown in his add-ons, which is like another killer we mentioned already. Freddy is a very easy rinse and repeat killer, and he's not going to penalize you if you make poor plays. On the other side of the coin, you can of course just spam his snares or fake pallets, and there's not an awful lot a survivor can do to counterplay that. But when it comes to picking up a new killer for the very first time, he does actually hold your hand quite a bit when it comes to learning the mechanics. As I said earlier, you can use the gen slowdown add-ons to assist you if you're having problems pressuring gens. Alternatively, you can teleport to a gen if you know it has quite a bit of work on it. That can scare survivors away from gens as well. You can also make looping a little bit easier by using his snares, but it can also teach you good habits for killers like Trapper and Hag, as usually the places that you'd snare and get the most benefits from placing a snare are also good places to put traps. So when you're actually trying to learn killer, Freddy's kit will help you quite a bit. And as it stands currently, he has the highest kill rate of any killer in the game, according to recent stats. And now we have our final killer, which I genuinely don't think you can do better than if you are brand new to the game. Topping off our tier list is Wraith. And if you're wondering why I'm placing Wraith so high, it's because when it comes down to it, Wraith is the closest that we have in the game to a killer without a power. And this is completely on the opposite side of the coin of Freddy. He doesn't really hold your hand, and he stops you from getting reliant on powers that could help you or help to make up for when you are doing poorly. With Wraith, he doesn't really have an awful lot to help him with chases, or when it comes to pressuring gens either. When it all boils down to it, Wraith is as stripped back as you can get, and for that reason, I think he's the best killer to teach you how to play Dead by Daylight. Every other killer, when it all boils down to it, has all of the things that you will learn from Wraith with a little bit of an extra lesson on how to use their power too. Therefore, when people ask me who they should play when getting into the game for the first time, I will always suggest Wraith. Plus, he got some nice buffs recently, which I think makes him a little bit more viable across all ranks. Anyway, that is my tier list. The killers that you should pick up when you are brand new to the game. Of course, like I said, this is just my opinion, so take it with a grain of salt. I know some people are going to disagree, and that's fine too. But I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, be sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments if you want to see some more videos like this. As always, my socials are linked in the description, and I want to thank you all for making it this far into another video. Thank you all so much, guys. See you later.
Perfect, perfect.